Welcome and hello. I'm Nancy Cope, here to introduce you to a new program on HHTV called Writers Read. Linda and Paul Niebanck have designed another chance for us to hear our friends read what they've been writing. And you already know what you might hear. A memoir, maybe a short story, or maybe a work in progress. In the past, these have been live performances or events. This time, of course, they're videotaped. Count on Horizon House to adapt and move forward. I'm going to read you the dates of these events. November 24th, 7 plus 7, December 1st, December 8th, and December 15th. Now let's hear our readers tonight. Welcome back to Readers and Writers. It's so good to be here, and we are so thankful that Linda and Paul and Risa had the energy and the skills to invite us back to listen to Writers Read. And we are glad to welcome Cassandra and Mary and Paul as readers tonight. And we have to, we have to start with Paul's poem. And I usually am doing this with 70 people? And today we have 14 or so. So I need you to really listen and follow me. This is Paul's poem about writing, and I say a sentence and then you repeat it. Are you ready? Write, write, write.
Write, write, write.
Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
Then read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
You'll draw a crowd.
And give us great delight.
And give us great delight.
Isn't that a great poem? I just love it. I just love it. Okay, I have thought about words today a bit. And I have a homework assignment for you. Brace yourselves. I started to think about words that have a new meaning or a change in meaning since the pandemic started. And I invite all of you to make a list of those words and kind of explore what the meaning used to be and what the meaning is now. I'll just toss out a few that hit me. One of them, the word together. One of them is tomorrow. Has that changed? And I have to confess, the last word I'm going to toss out, because I know you have many, I have to say that the word Zoom used to have a different meaning. Didn't we play with trucks and go zoom, zoom, zoom? Little did we know the meaning of the word Zoom would change. And I'm so glad to introduce our readers now. And I have a little Cassandra story. Are you ready?
I don't know.
Cassandra, I am glad I have the opportunity to thank you, because many mornings after I do my exercise, 25 minutes in the exercise room, I leave the exercise room and go out on the patio. And I go out on the patio to see black sun and linear thought, the sculpture you and Richard gifted to the Horizon House. And I sit there and I think of those 4 words, speaking of words, black sun, linear thought. And I said, oh, there's another starter for a discussion group at Horizon House. Just what does that mean? But thank you so much for that gift, because I love seeing it every morning.
Oh, I'm glad you didn't test me on what it means. Thank you. This is really nice, and I'm thankful for those of you who really got this going. Thank you. I've never done a reading like this before. I wrote this piece last November, and in many ways it feels like a long time ago, and in other ways it feels very fresh and current. And I've entitled it A Particular Woman. I was rushing to catch my flight from Seattle to Dallas. Between the hassle of getting to the airport, checking a bag, and making my way through security, it appears I still had time to notice a particular woman. She intrigued me from the beginning. It happened we were both passengers awaiting our separate flights. From a glance, she seemed removed, but as I observed her more intently, it became apparent that despite her very put-together appearance, she was curiously shy. She didn't initiate conversation. Her eyes didn't connect with anyone that I could see, and I perceived a certain resignation as she retreated into her own thoughts. I grew even more curious when I discovered that we shared the same destination, and when our names were called, the irony continued.
Nancy?
We were both assigned to the same row with seats side by side. It appeared she needed some assistance in getting her hat box into the overhead bin. I was more than happy to accommodate. She slid into her seat by the window. Mine was on the aisle. Our eyes met only after we were seated, when she turned towards me and thanked me for my help. That was the first time I had the opportunity to see her up close. My earlier impression of her seemed accurate. Yes, she was attractive, only now I could more see easily the wrinkles around her eyes when she smiled, the fine lines around her mouth that women seem to develop with age. Her hair was coiffed in a manner that spoke of a more than casual effect, yet the thinning was also noticeable. She also had a certain refinement that didn't allow for extended access. We settled into our individual airplane modes, finding our appropriately selected reading material to reduce the requirement for continued conversation. It wasn't until the hostess asked for our choice of a light lunch to be served that I attempted a non-threatening conversation. I began by asking her if she might be visiting friends in Dallas. She seemed rather relaxed at this point and said no, she was simply attending a conference there. When I inquired further, she said she had discovered writing to be a medium in which she could find clarity. So you're a writer? I asked. She muffled a soft laugh and assured me she didn't feel like she was a writer. She simply enjoyed writing. She indicated that she valued expressing herself and found writing a thought-provoking means to gain insight. Secretly, I was pleased to gain the confidence of this person, sufficient that she revealed a part of herself to me. She in turn asked of me my business in Dallas. I was delighted for the opportunity to share a little bit of myself, yet aware I didn't want to blow it and seem overly self-important. That was good advice. I tried my best. I began by telling her my profession as a landscape architect, and that we, our firm, had recently been selected to redesign a major park in downtown Dallas. This was one of a series of meetings we were having with the city planners and engineers. This reference to landscape architecture seemed to alter her listening acumen. I queried her further. She fell silent. Several moments, maybe minutes later, she spoke slowly and told me her husband was a landscape architect and had had his own firm in Seattle. When she told me her husband's name, I was stunned. I had read of Richard's death and knew him professionally and with the greatest regard, but that was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I wondered to myself why such apparent sadness filled her now. Suddenly I felt like I was insensitively, I can't pronounce some words correctly, opened a subject that was too near the surface.
Cassandra, speak up.
She intuitively sensed my discomfort and was quick to assuage any guilt I may have felt. She told me that Richard had died an expected death. After 19 years with Parkinson's disease, living in supported living, in and out of hospice care, he elected to end his life under the Washington State Death with Dignity law. She related that she was with him during the entire process and further volunteered that while his death was expected, one can never anticipate how that absence will be experienced. In hindsight, she said they were right for one another in so many ways, each of them recently coming out of a prior marriage, yearning for a promising new loving relationship. They found it in one another, and their love affair lasted for 35 years. This was despite the chaos that ensued with 7 teenagers between them, and 5 of them living in the same household following her marriage. She continued, they talked about love frequently, their love, and just as often asked, why are we so lucky? She told me they agreed it was principally because of the respect they held for one another. It was the glue that was called upon from time to time. She reminisced about all the things he taught her, beginning with an appreciation of architecture that manifests itself into elegant design. He encouraged her curiosity and loved having her as his private student. That knowledge became valuable to her as her own career unfolded. But through it all, there wasn't a time when they didn't have one another's back. She shared with me further, Richard had learned the ways of Circle. He had observed her behavior after being with her Circle women friends multiple times. One day he asked her, can we do a circle? Just the 2 of us? She was ecstatic. Of course they could, and they did. Most every Friday afternoon following their lunch date. One of the things he last said to her and wrote her the day before he died was thanking her for teaching him how to talk about feelings and what that meant for him and them as a couple. Then our lunches arrived, and for me it gave me time to savor the sharing with this previously unknown person and led me to wonder about other phases of her life. After little did I expect, her story wasn't over. Feeling refreshed with a bite to eat and a little of something to drink, she began talking as if her conversation never stopped. She had my attention and I was leaning in, not wanting to miss a word. In time, she said, the sadness lessens. Things begin to take up empty space, old interests reappear, and new interests take form. Then to her surprise, a year and a half after Richard died, she met someone under ironic circumstances. Both of their prior spouses died the same week of one another. His name was George. He was an educator all his career. It was what he chose to do, and when asked what he loved about it most, his answer often followed along the lines, he hoped that somewhere along the way, he helped a student or 2 turn themselves around, facing the world anew. At this point, Cassandra cited several relevant observations about late love. An interesting difference occurs, she said, between one marriage and the beginning of a new relationship, as was ours. Children are likely now adults with their own children. Thus, there are few, if any, commitments that take priority. In fact, the couple is now the priority. Spontaneity is frequent and vigorously encouraged. He confesses he feels like a young man when they are together. And she confesses that he makes her feel like a queen when he reads her poetry. A whole new fragrance dominates their world. One of the reasons is identities are secure. Our identities are secure. They are no longer raising children. They are no longer building a career. They are enjoying the fruits of their labor. The time they spend together is focused on whatever they choose. They learn the interests of one another and recognize they are enriched by two and nourished by, I'm sorry, I have ointment in my eyes from this morning and I'm not seeing very well. The time they spend together is focused on whatever they choose. They learn the interests of one another and recognize they are enriched by the new and nourished by the already familiar. They learned they enjoyed reading aloud together, a frequent ending of an evening. Many were classics, the others perhaps not. What came from those times together was often interpreted by one of them, was often interrupted by one of them being reminded of something salient to the story, of learning more deeply about one another's history. Dinners were times of long conversation. Nothing in the refrigerator? No problem. Let's go to the dining room. Let's go to a weekend in the Conner? No problem. Be sure we get the same room with the view we like. Cassandra's echo, the word tenderly, is used frequently, indicating it is surely a foundation of their love. She was drawn to George's gentleness and the way he approached life. He read poetry. He wrote poetry. He lived poetry. Their lives were enriched in ways beyond expectation. It was implied without specifics that their lives together were robust and caring. She did make comment that his gentleness was foremost in everything he did, his actions always deliberate. To that she added, George was the most inwardly secure man she had ever known. All this resulted in her huge further gratitude of the beauty within their late love. Surely it was Camelot, until it wasn't. It seems our 4.5 years was our limit. Only we didn't know there was a limit. We didn't anticipate, we had no clue. We were too caught up in ourselves together. George fell. George died. I didn't. There will be no conclusion to this story. Cassandra will continue from Dallas to San Miguel Allende in Mexico for a 3-month stay beginning January 2020. This is a first for her traveling alone to a place she has never been. She doesn't speak the language or know anyone there. She has made arrangements either long distance or through the internet. She found a place to stay and negotiated the price, plus adding a refrigerator in her room to the deal. She had subsequently learned that there was a writers' conference during her stay. I am anxious to see how she adapts and how she responds using the resources she has learned over a lifetime. It was time for me to pick up my pieces and renew my life again. In reflection, I was uncertain why I was so compelled to the writer's retreat on Whidbey Island at Aldermarsh in November this past year. I had been there before. I knew it was a safe place to discover what I needed. It was familiar and I settled right in. The workshop theme for the week was entitled Self, is the source of story. My intention and what I hoped to achieve was foggy at best, but on the periphery, I knew I wanted to figure out why was I going around and around in circles since George's death. The circles went like this. When I would talk out loud to George, I felt guilty that I was not paying enough attention to Richard. When I talked out loud to Richard, I felt George was being put in second place. It was so conflicting. I felt guilt and discomfort most of the time. That constant internal tension when I was talking with one and not the other. Yet I wanted to talk with each of them. The situation and my mental health needed resolution. And then it seemed miraculous. Without any sort of direction for me, the essential source of what I needed began to unfold. The more I wrote, the more I began to see my desired intent. It was the writing that was required, the actual process of writing that revealed my intent. In the end, I can clearly say I learned what I wanted to learn, acknowledged the importance of each of these two men in my life, and at the same time know that they were unalike for me because we were in one another's lives at very different times. At a certain age and circumstances, my needs and wants were suited perfectly with Richard as my lover and friend. Likewise, when I met George, I was older, as was he. We had both experienced loss. We came together with different expectations than a younger love. We were grateful for our good fortune later in life. It is also my wish to extend their lives through me as much as I can be true to who they were. I think of them as my two guiding spirits. Thank you for your love, and now you live in me. Do I do something here?
Thank you so much, Cassandra.
Can you help me take that off?
Or something. Oh, welcome back again, and here we go again with words. And we thank Mary for coming with us, with her words. And Mary, one of the words I would like to start with is your wonderful last name. I do not know how to pronounce it, and I've taken French, so I'm tempted to try to say it French. Would you tell us your last name?
Well, if I tell you, you'll be even more mixed up. I had a very good friend who used to call me Mary Piette, Sister Mary Piette. But the pronunciation is Piette.
Piette, okay.
Piette.
Thank you so much.
It's very French.
And am I right that you moved into Horizon House in 2019?
Yes.
And Mary has come to Horizon House and grabbed the ring on the carousel. I see Mary so busy and involved in this place. I don't think Horizon House has ever been called a carousel, but that might be a good image for Horizon House, because Mary, it's good to have you here.
Thank you. It's because I forgot something downstairs and I go up and I go down. Strangely enough, just 2 days ago, I was talking to a friend from college years ago, and she was trying to make me feel better that many of my stories have not been published. And she said, Mary, there's this wonderful book. Incidentally, she's a Mohawk Indian, and I never think of her as that, but she's an expert on indigenous affairs. And it's by the author of the stories is Thomas King, and he's written a book called The Truth About Stories. And she made me feel so good, because I used to say, you know, I really feel these stories are important. And obviously, Cassandra, you do too. And he says, he explores how stories shape who we are and how we understand and interact with other people. So And I have been a storyteller in the library, and there's nothing more fun than telling a children's story. I brought first a small poem. We're going to try to show you a picture of my sister, who was much younger than me, and we often thought of her as the entertainment in the household. And she would go out in the winter, be all bundled up, and she'd said, "It's time for my fresh air." So I happened to catch a picture of her hiding behind a huge pile of snow. And so often that picture, I think I should head larger, make it professional. But I don't write poems, but I did write just a poem for Ruth. Snow. So much to remember. Sledding, sliding, skating, freezing, a small sister delighting, high snow hedges. So, with that in mind, I'd like to read you a story about northern Canada. And it's called Picnics. And thank you for having me read today, because I had never looked at this story from my mother's point of view. And as I was getting ready for today, I think you will understand what my mother's point of view was.
Mary, speak up.
Okay. Picnics with Mr. and Mrs. Sleeper. We thought it was a treat. The old wicker basket, usually filled with our Sunday picnics, would be pulled out on a lazy or perhaps a boring summer day. Sandwiches, usually peanut butter with lettuce, good peanut butter with crunchy bits, would be made and carefully wrapped in waxed paper. Cold, homemade lemonade, lemons halved and squeezed on a small glass dish, carefully designed to catch the juice. Chipped ice from the huge block in the ice box, added with sugar and water, and stored in the family thermos. Perhaps some fruit, maybe an oatmeal cookie, and then we were on our way, wearing our summer pajama outfits. We too, 4 and 5 years old, just for once did not need dresses. We would wear these fancy pantsuits and swing out along the trail to Mrs. Sleeper's. Like Mr. Frog, we were off on an adventure in the country. We walked 3 long city blocks up the street and followed the little path to the Sleeper's home. We knew Mrs. Sleeper, or the Sleepers, because Mrs. Sleeper, a tall, gaunt, craggy woman with her hair firmly swept back in a roll with large gray hairpins, was a seamstress. She supported her household with her fine sewing. She had quilted sunbonnet quilts for our crib. She shortened or made over the hand-me-down clothes we received. Mrs. Sleeper would be expecting us as a phone call in the morning alerted her that we needed to be away for a while. Mrs. Sleeper, as always, had time to greet us. She opened wide her door, standing tall, wearing her high-fashion big apron over her long shirtwaist dress. An added treat was to see that large and frolicsome collie, prancing, ready to play with us. We spread the picnic out, outside, and we took off to roam the market garden, to throw the ball for the collie, and once more to pump furiously on the outdoor water pump. The ice-cold water tingled our hands with delicious shivers. These rinses were much needed after chasing after the doggy ball, or after a visit to their outdoor facilities, scrupulously clean, always with a Sears catalog for paper. We had been instructed to always sprinkle some white ash kept in the pail near the door, and to firmly latch the door outside. This little house was not a sanctuary to buzzing black flies. We watched Mr. Sleeper and tried not to stare. He was, like his wife, tall, elderly, and different. He was ever busy repairing and carpeting about his yard and home. His right pants leg empty. He hated wearing his wooden leg. Therein lay a story told to us one evening. Mr. and Mrs. Sleeper were not natives of Belleville. They had lived in the rocky northern land of Bancroft, now just 60 miles north, but then far away at a time when roads were limited and certainly closed in the winter. They were homesteaders, eagerly carving a life in the land available. It had to be cleared, that rocky land of trees and lakes. Much of this work was done in the winter, when no crops could be planted and nurtured. Each day that winter, Mr. Sleeper rose, piled on warm clothing, and set off over the snowy fields. Had it not snowed that night, he could follow his tracks deep into the woods to his last work stop. When it had snowed, he would again break the trail, sinking deep into several feet of snow, hoping to hold his balance against this deep blanket. Finding his way mostly by instinct, the new fences declared their presence as higher mountains of snow lining the pastures. On snow-driven nights, Mr. Sleeper had to set up a long rope stretching from his cabin to his barn. During the early black evenings, the heavy rope helped guide him without fail to his destination. A farm boy, Mr. Sleeper recognized the world of snow blindness and being lost in the drift experience. Vast empty fields of snow, even short distances, could distract. Going to the woods meant long hours away each day. Mr. Sleeper would set out only in those short daylight hours. His job was to fell the trees, to clear more land to be ready for spring and plowing. These were cold days away, moving rocks, felling trees, hauling logs for fences and firewood. He would watch a silent world of snow build up each winter day. One evening it grew late. Mr. Sleeper did not return to their log cabin. Evening darkened. Worried, Mrs. Sleeper tugged on coat and boots and set out. She hiked through craggy tree trunks, slate gray rock piles, tall drifts of snow shining in the darkness, and finally reached the woods to find her husband pinned beneath a tree. They were a mile or more from the cabin. That slight, gaunt woman, axe in hand, cut the tree and freed her husband's leg from its entrapment. Badly injured, his leg imp and dragging, they struggled back to home and hearth. Far away from any community, there was a long travel early the next morning to the nearby town. Too late to save that leg. We as children gazed with awe and admiration at this couple. She stood tall and strong. He could swing about and continue to work, managing his routines with care, crutch, and persistence. Moving to a kinder spot, they eked out a simple life, living further south. Winters continued there, but not so bitter. Together, the Sleepers welcomed us into their lives. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you.
I got the shivers listening.
Well, I have
Oh, that's how real it was then.
a folder of cold winter stories. If you read the three of them, you could, I thought out loud, you could count the number of times the word cold, cold, cold. And it was cold. The other story I wanted to share, there were four of us, remember, we had so much fun. You're going to take your mask off, aren't you? Promise?
Okay, welcome back again for our third reader, and it is our friend Paul. And Paul, I have a favor to ask of you. Are you ready? I would like to challenge anybody here listening to take the first two lines of your poem and finish it differently. Would that be okay with you?
Indeed.
Because that's why I have such a hard time memorizing it, because I think I'm making up my own ending to it every time. So write until you get it right. And then finish the poem and put it in Paul's mailbox. Welcome, Paul. I'd love to hear you read.
Thank you. Do you like my mask?
Yes.
All right. Do you like...
You have to wear it forever.
Well, now, wait a minute. Do you like my equivalent face? The answer is yes. All right. The editing will take care of this situation, I'm sure.
No.
No. Well, I'm getting all messed up here. Okay. Now, for a long time in my life, you could say the middle part of my life, I was an academic. And academics are pretentious people, by and large, I discovered. And I'm done with that. I've been done with that for about 20 years, maybe more. I no longer wrote at all. And then finally, the last 2 years, I've begun to do personal writing. It's much more satisfying than what I did long before, because personal writing speaks the truth, and academic writing is by and large contrived. So welcome to my truth. Some time ago, we lived in California, Linda and I, and for 20 years actually, and we knew there a couple, Herb and Ellie Foster, and their children, and they knew ours. We were wonderful friends, and it's about them that I will be reading. We engaged politics together. We engaged spiritual things together. We engaged familial things together. We engaged all manner of conversational things together. It was a splendid friendship that to this day has remarkable influence on both of us. And it's about them that this story comes into being. The story is called It's Different, Just Different Now. It's just different now. One afternoon, a few months ago, Ellie glanced over and saw on Herb's notepad, evening. That's where the day declines, still itself, but very quiet. The note was in Herb's handwriting. Herb's Alzheimer's, now half a dozen years advanced, hadn't stopped him from being the sweet fellow whom we had all known for so long. His eyes still met ours when we came by. His smile was as warm as always, and his greeting just as sincere. But the disease had stopped him from speaking. Except for this. Hi. It's been a while since you were here. I'm glad you came. And a moment later, would you like a cup of tea? That's what we got, whoever we were, at whatever time of day we visited, and that's all we got. We figured that Herb's relational capacities had gone the way of his intellectual acuity, that his greeting to us was an expression of habit, that he hadn't any idea who he was speaking to, or the meaning of whatever conversation then might ensue in his presence. Even Ellie supposed that this is true. She hardly ever spoke to him anymore. Even simple instructions seemed not to penetrate. She'd have to take him by the hand and indicate non-verbally what she thought would be good for him to do. And when people dropped by, she encouraged them to inquire about Herb by way of her. And so she escorted him to the bathroom that afternoon and returned to set the soup on the stove. Ellie was arrested by what she saw as she passed on Herb's pad, so much so that she had to catch her already short breath and steady her already distracted mind. He didn't write that, she thought. If he did write it, he must have copied it. But there was nothing nearby which he might have copied. And his pad had remained unmarked for 2 years. It's just like him. He must have written it down years ago. It must have come naturally through his fingers. Ellie checked the bathroom, returned to the table, and sat down. Could he still be himself? She murmured. Could he have actually chosen to stop talking? Herb had always been a person of few words. He had been careful to say only what he actually knew and what was important in the moment. Does he actually understand his condition? Does he know me? During the next few days and weeks, Ellie didn't have much chance to think through the matter. She did speak more often to Herb, but he remained silent, except for her name. Ellie, he'd say. Herb, she'd reply, and stop everything to touch his arm. Meanwhile, Ellie's infirmities closed in on her. Her eyesight got worse. Her osteoporosis left her leaning on her walker and wishing she could just sit down. Her arthritis made every joint hurt. Worst of all was her emphysema. Breathing was hard work now, and to talk made the roof of her mouth feel raw. Last month, it was on a Tuesday, Ellie called their son David at 3 a.m. with an intolerably painful abdomen. He drove her to emergency. Tests followed and examinations. She was admitted to the hospital and fitted with an oxygen mask. The physician concluded that there was a hernia pressing against her lung. The surgeon was invited in. David and his brother Kenny were consulted. Other family members came by. They decided against surgery. A general email went out at noon, quote, Ellie's situation is critical, but she will probably be able to return home soon. Meanwhile, the family will take care of her. We know that you all are anxious to know Ellie's condition and to show your love to both Ellie and Herb. But for now, we ask you not to visit Ellie at the hospital or Herb at home. Please, we insist, do not call Ellie and Herb's home phone number. We are taking turns being with Herb. We want to protect him against undue shocks. Tuesday went by, and Wednesday, and Thursday morning. At noon, the family elected to take Ellie off life supports. Another email went out. Quote, Ellie's situation has taken a turn for the worse. Her life is likely to last a couple of days, maybe 3. She is comfortable and sedated. We are keeping vigil. Thank you for respecting our wishes not to visit or call on the phone. On Thursday afternoon, David's wife Margot was with her when the phone rang. Uncharacteristically, Herb picked up. Herb, I'm so sorry to hear about Ellie. Margot took the phone from Herb and concluded the exchange. Afterward, Herb said, I want to be with Ellie. Take me to her. Margot did not hesitate. Within half an hour, Herb was at Ellie's bedside in the hospital. He leaned over and kissed her cheek. Ellie had been sleeping. Her eyes opened, their twinkle shone. Ellie. Herb. Sing me a song, she said. He sang. Old Man River, that old man river, he don't say nothing, he just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling along. Ellie closed her eyes and died. Herb is quiet again now, except for this to Margot weeks later. My relationship with Ellie is never ending. It's just different now.
Paul, thank you for that gift. That was a gift. Okay, we're going to think what a good, rich evening this was with Cassandra, Mary, and Paul, readers and writers, all wrapped up in one person. And everybody is a reader and a writer, aren't they, Paul?
Indeed.
Indeed. Take care. We'll see you again. You have just heard 3 readers of the 50 readers who have read and shared their writing with us since 2018. Ina Bray had this idea that writers should share what they've written by reading their writing. I'd like to share with you the 50 people who have shared. John Longris, Bernice Kastner, Peter Elbow, Grant Hildebrand, Judy Brown, Donald Meyer, Artis Palmer, Jean Durning, Simon Ottenberg, Anne-Marie Godston, Joan Singler, Erwin Saracen, Phyllis Van Orton, Beth Davis, Bob Fitzgerald, Melissa Fall, Estella Leopold, David Gucci, Grace Popoff, Jean Carlson, Audrey Whitecamp, Phyllis Lamphere, Marianne Anderson, Bill Anderson, Carol Ottenberg, Red McVitie, Barbara Ray, Ina Bray, John Clement, Gordon Orions, Jane Hastings, Jesse Attree, Nancy Rust, Peter Corning, Paul Niebanck, Ray Tufts, Abe Bergman, Lee Scheingold, Maid Adams, Sue Lynch, Pat Decker, Ann Ormsby, Norman Hirsch, Ann Pound, Bill Stark, Marcia Iverson, Bob Corwin, Cassandra Carothers, and Mary Piette. What an amazing time we've had with all of you, and thank you all for sharing with us.